on a mountain called Wild Wolf, known as a familiar hunting ground for novice adventurers. A middle-aged man was diligently gathering herbs. After some time, he had collected enough to complete his quest and even kept a portion for himself. That man was Kane, a rank D adventurer with over 20 years of experience in herb gathering. Before heading back to the guild, Kane decided to perform a ritual offering to the mountain goddess. He placed bundles of wild herbs and a few sprigs of wolf sage before a small statue of the deity he had built in the shrine. Though unsure if the mountain goddess truly heard him, Kane still held onto a quiet hope. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through, rustling the leaves of a peculiar tree nearby. Kane froze in surprise, wondering if the tree had appeared out of nowhere. Despite years of wandering these mountains, he had never seen it before. Suddenly, a fruit fell. Kane bent down, inspecting it closely, and realized it was the resurrection fruit. Not only was it the key ingredient for revival potions, but it was also unimaginably valuable. Moments later, the tree was shrouded in a mysterious mist and slowly disappeared. As the situation sank in, Kane felt his composure slip. Selling this fruit could buy him the dream house he'd always wanted, provide aid to those in need, and finally allow him to retire from adventuring. But just as memories of his past adventures surfaced, a voice jolted him back to the present. Standing before him was a girl named Altina, tears brimming in her eyes. The moment she saw the resurrection fruit in Kane's hand, she broke down sobbing. Desperate to save a friend on the verge of death, Altina begged him to give her the fruit. She fumbled through her pouch, trying to offer Kane some money, but all she had left were 3 silver coins. Panic spread across her face as she remembered most of her funds had gone to purchasing other ingredients for the revival potion. Seeing her fear and despair, Kane's mind flashed back to a painful memory, a time when he, too, lacked the money and resources to save someone he loved. Without hesitation, Kane handed Altina the resurrection fruit. She stared at him in disbelief, stunned that he would forgo such a life-changing opportunity to help her. Kane gently told her never to abandon her friend. Seeing the doubt in her eyes, he smiled and accepted the 3 silver coins as a symbolic trade. Patting her head lightly, Kane urged Altina to hurry and save her friend before sunset. Then he turned and began the journey back to the guild, leaving Altina alone in the forest. As Kane disappeared from view, Altina let out a deep sigh of relief and hugged the resurrection fruit tightly to her chest. The next morning, the innkeeper noticed Kane seemed unusually cheerful. He explained that he'd earned a bit of extra money the day before and celebrated with a rank C adventuring party after they took down a massive bear. Kane grinned, describing the hearty feast of grilled meat he'd enjoyed. The innkeeper joked that perhaps the gods were watching over him, though they hadn't sent him a wife yet. Kane laughed heartily and stepped outside. When he entered the Adventurers Guild in the town of Ern, the usual jeers greeted him. Other adventurers mocked him, calling him grass picker for his years of being stuck at rank D. But suddenly, Elena, the guild receptionist, called out to him, silencing the crowd. She announced that Kane had received a special request from none other than the famed rank S party, Rosen Maidens in Bloom. Kane was stunned. He had never even heard of the Rosen Maidens in Bloom. Eleanor explained that the team consisted of 3 members. The Pure Saint, the all-powerful witch, and the Swift Sword Princess, hailed as the strongest party in the entire continent of Auria. They were currently in Ern for an important mission. Not wanting to cause Kane any more discomfort, she apologized for the unnecessary attention. Kane used the moment to ask for his usual kind of job. Elena handed him a request from the church, asking for ingredients to brew potions, a task rewarded with a single silver coin. It was precisely the type of job no one else wanted but suited Kane perfectly. Meanwhile, in the guild's consultation room, Elena bowed apologetically before Princess Anastoria. She explained she had failed to convince Kane. It appeared the girl Kane met in the forest the previous day was none other than the Swift Sword Princess herself, who had sought him out for help. Sephiria, the Pure Saint, gently asked if Kane had any specific reason to decline their invitation. Maya, the all-powerful witch, true to her name, dismissed the matter altogether, suggesting they give up. With a mischievous grin, she hugged Anastoria and teased her for being so preoccupied with Kane. Loki, their tactician, proposed Anastoria try approaching Kane herself once more. Anastoria considered the idea, until her gaze fell upon Elena. Elena broke the silence, explaining that Kane always accepted requests from the church, even though the rewards were meager. She shared that the church struggled financially, which also affected the orphanage it supported. The potions kept the church afloat, but without Kane's dedication to gathering herbs, both the church and the orphanage would have shut down long ago. Hearing this, Sephiria couldn't hold back her tears. Anastoria listened in disbelief, criticizing Kane for not demanding a higher price for his contributions. She even accused Elena of exploiting Kane for her own benefit, suggesting she used her charm like an older woman manipulating a kind-hearted fool. Though furious, Elena held her tongue, thinking the princess was nothing more than an arrogant brat. To avoid conflict, she remained silent. Maya, ever pragmatic, chimed in, suggesting the princess ask her family to provide financial support and resolve the issue once and for all. Anastasia bristled with anger, insisting that throwing money at the problem wouldn't win Kane's respect. She revealed that she had visited Kane's humble home and seen his impoverished living conditions. Despite that, he had given her the resurrection fruit without hesitation. She knew Kane would never accept her money. Sephiria joined the heated exchange, tearfully declaring that she owed her life to Kane. Maya grew impatient, pushing the other two aside and reminding them that their original goal was to enjoy tea with elegant women. That's why she strongly opposed the idea of letting a man join their team. Despite Maya's protests, Anastasia remained unfazed, insisting she had a plan. Meanwhile, back on Wild Wolf Mountain, Kane was busy gathering wild garlic. After collecting enough, he considered stopping by the small shrine but decided against it, thinking the garlic's strong smell wasn't suitable as an offering. On his way down, he unexpectedly encountered a group of goblins. As expected, he planned to take another route, knowing he couldn't handle so many of them alone. Kane muttered to himself, wondering if the frequent goblin sightings near the village were mere coincidence. He began considering the idea of forming a team to eliminate them. Suddenly, he came face to face with a menacing dragon. Fear seized him, making it nearly impossible to stay composed. Elsewhere, Anastasia excitedly revealed that this was all part of her plan to help Kane rank up. Maya groaned in regret, lamenting that she hadn't stopped the princess from luring the dragon to the mountain. She pointed out that with Kane's current equipment, he had no chance against such a monster. Sephiria, however, expressed confidence in Kane's abilities, and Anastasia agreed, insisting that he could triumph without even attacking the dragon. Maya scratched her head in disbelief, finding it absurd that the princess treated the ferocious dragon like a harmless lizard. Meanwhile, Kane was running for his life, the dragon roaring behind him. The goblins, caught in the chaos, joined the chase, running even faster than Kane to escape the beast. Amid the panic, Kane spotted a mithril sword glinting on the ground, clearly planted by Anastasia. He grabbed it, hesitating as he prepared to face the dragon. But the instinct to flee overpowered his courage. Anastasia watched, stunned, while Maya shook her head, having predicted this outcome. The dragon continued its relentless pursuit until Kane tripped, narrowly dodging its deadly jaws. Scrambling to his feet, Kane realized he had unintentionally led the dragon toward the village at the base of the mountain. Just then, a mysterious voice echoed in his mind, urging him to protect the village. Gripping the sword tightly, Kane stood, determination flickering in his eyes as the three women watched from afar, each with a different expression. The painful memory surged back. Kane charged into battle, but his sword flew from his grasp. The dragon roared, sending him crashing to the ground. In that instant, it lunged at him, while the girls watched anxiously from afar. Kane caught a glimpse of his sword, glowing, floating in mid-air. In a blink, the sound of blood splattering echoed as the blade drove into the dragon's skull. Kane still wondered if the beast was truly dead, until it let out one final roar, then collapsed. Staring at his trembling legs, he couldn't believe what had just happened. Maya saw it as a miracle. Kane had struck the dragon's weak spot by chance. Anastasia, however, insisted Kane had deliberately failed to turn the tide in his favor, and that he was a swordsman the world had yet to recognize. Maya thought Sephiria would agree with her, but Sephiria whispered that Kane had been blessed by divine protection. After Kane's victory, Anastasia asked Maya if she would now accept him into the team. To fully convince her, the princess emphasized that with a mithril sword, Kane would improve his fighting skills, and the reward from slaying the dragon would help upgrade his gear. Excited, Anastasia declared that one day, Kane would become a legendary swordsman like her. Just then, Kane heard the voice of a sorceress, causing the girls to quickly flee the scene, leaving Kane wondering if he was just imagining it. At that moment, Kane recalled the mysterious voice he had heard during his battle with the dragon. He felt something strange, as if someone had granted him newfound power. He believed it must have been a gift from the goddess. He considered thanking her properly, but then wondered what to do with the dragon's lifeless body. The next day, Elena yawned repeatedly as she assigned tasks to the adventurer. Kane entered and noticed she looked exhausted. When he asked if it was because of evaluating the dragon's corpse, she replied no, as another department was handling that. Elena explained that she had been working overtime to finish the reception desk duties. Speaking of last night, Elena mentioned that Anastasia had been furious when she learned Kane wouldn't be promoted, despite slaying the dragon. The princess had demanded a meeting with the guildmaster to clarify things, But Elena emphasized that Cain only reported finding the dragon's body on the mountain. Anastoria had immediately objected, insisting she had witnessed everything firsthand and wasn't making it up, even suggesting the dragon had been lucky not to die at Anastoria's hands. Elena also mentioned the mithril sword she had already prepared, and the princess admitted that she had arranged it, but not entirely. She also emphasized that Cain's swordsmanship was exceptional. Elena reminded her that the guild always adhered to the ranking system to accurately reflect the true strength of adventurers. When she saw Anastoria fuming, Elena pointed out that in a recent S-rank mission, Saphiria's life had been in serious danger. She added that while Anastoria was a skilled swordswoman, she couldn't protect her own team. When she saw Anastoria fuming, Elena pointed out that in a recent S-rank mission, Saphiria's life had been in serious danger. She added that while Anastoria was a skilled swordswoman, she couldn't protect her own team. Elena pleaded with Anastoria, asking her to let her continue protecting the guild's adventurers under her guidance. Back in the present, Cain snapped Elena out of her thoughts. She quickly apologized and handed him his reward for discovering the dragon's corpse. 6,000 gold, converted into 6 platinum coins. Seeing Cain's calm reaction, Elena was surprised. Cain explained that in fact, he was somewhat overwhelmed by the large sum, created through advanced alchemy. It was the first time he had ever seen such money, as he was used to earning a single silver coin after 3 days of work. A moment later, Elena mentioned they had found the owner of the mithril sword. But the owner, more specifically, Anastoria, had sent word that Cain could keep it as she had bought a new one. As Elena covered for the princess's excuses, she didn't realize that it made Cain feel uneasy. As Cain passed by the church, he still couldn't believe the 6 platinum coins and mithril sword he had just received. Deciding to visit the orphanage, he overheard Sister Sylvia, an elf nun from the Urntown parish, pleading for more time to repay the church's debt. Kurz, a large burly man from the group, pulled out a vial of potion they were selling and smashed it in front of her. He suggested that Sylvia could settle her debt in another way. Grabbing her hand, he tilted her chin up and said that as a high-ranking elf, she could easily make 200 gold in one night. Sylvia pushed his hand away, reminding him she was a nun. Kurtz's gaze then shifted to the orphaned children watching from behind, thinking they would be willing to protect the church in her place. Before things could escalate, Cain intervened just in time. His presence was immediately noticed when the group recognized him as Snakehead, a member of the infamous Viper Two-Headed clan. Rumors of their shady activities circulated, and Cain wondered what they wanted with Sylvia. One cold glance from Snakehead was enough to send a chill down his spine. Jinx, a long-haired man in the group, advised Cain to stick to his herb picking and stay out of this. Hares, another member, recognized Cain as the one who found the dragon's corpse on the mountain. He demanded Cain pay the 200 gold the church owed, fully aware the actual debt was far greater. Cain asked how much the total debt was. And Snakehead revealed the church owed them 6,000 gold. Jinx scoffed, doubting Cain had the means to pay. But Cain pulled out 6 platinum coins, enough to settle the entire debt. Though clearly displeased, Hares had no choice but to present a contract, as instructed by his boss. Snakehead emphasized that his family was a legitimate loan sharking operation, assuring Sylvia they wouldn't cause trouble if the debt was paid on time. He apologized to Sylvia for the inconvenience and reminded her to come to them if she needed financial help. As they left, Cain collapsed to the ground, prompting Sylvia to rush over and worry. She apologized, promising to find a way to repay him. But Cain reassured her, saying he owed her for raising him at the orphanage. When they discussed the church's large debt, Sylvia explained that some members of the clan had been taking a share of the orphaned children's earnings from selling souvenirs in the square. They claimed it was an unpaid tax from 100 years ago, a so-called rent fee. Cain was furious, unable to understand why they had to be responsible for something like that. He suspected the clan was in cahoots with the local government to fabricate tax evasion excuses. Sylvia apologized again and explained that this was why Cain had always received low rewards. Hearing this, Cain realized the clan wasn't just after money, they were targeting Sylvia. She mentioned she had some good news, but just then, the children swarmed around Cain, cutting off the conversation. Cain reassured the children, still shaken from the earlier incident, and thanked Kid, the oldest, for looking after the younger ones. After chatting and reminiscing, Cain invited them for a light meal. Standing at the gate, Maya and Saphiria admired Cain's sincerity, while Anastoria fumed, feeling he should have used the money to upgrade his gear instead. They soon decided to take action against Snakehead's gang. Elsewhere, the thugs discussed how Cain had ruined their plans. Still, they kept an eye on the children, confident Sylvia would soon turn to them for help. One of Snakehead's underlings suggested eliminating Cain before he ruined their plans again. However, Snakehead shook his head, warning that killing another adventurer would be a serious crime. This took everyone by surprise. None of them expected him to think that way. Snakehead then informed his crew that there had been multiple reports of monsters appearing on Wolfberry Mountain, leading to several adventurers' deaths. With a threatening expression, he quietly began planning how to eliminate his problems while protecting his reputation. Maya asked Anastasia if they should act now, but she replied that they should observe the gang's movements for a while. The princess suddenly realized that once Kane surpassed the C-rank adventurers, he would undoubtedly be promoted. Maya warned that Elena would start complaining if they continued to interfere, but Anastasia didn't seem to care, swearing she would make everyone recognize Kane's true potential. Maya then noticed Safiria was nowhere to be found. At the orphanage behind the church, the children happily ate the fresh fruit Kane had brought. To show her gratitude, Sylvia gave him a vial of antidote and a vial of healing potion, the most valuable items the church sold. Kane declined, but Sylvia revealed she had intended to gift him these potions long before the incident with the clan. Finally, he accepted, signaling for the children to give him something else. A few minutes later, Kane received a wreath, some toys, letters, and other little treasures. Touched by the children's heartfelt gestures, he thanked them with emotion. After storing the gifts in his treasure box, Kane asked Sylvia about the good news she had mentioned. With excitement, Sylvia explained that the pure Saintess was conducting a pilgrimage throughout Ern Town. She seemed to be famous for her kindness and the help she offered to churches wherever she visited. Hearing this, Kane felt the name sounded familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Just then, Safiria walked in and approached him. He noticed her face was slightly flushed, and the distance between them grew smaller. Suddenly, Safiria declared that Kane was her destiny and vowed to dedicate her entire life to him. Kane, overwhelmed by her closeness, struggled to think clearly. Hesitant, he asked her age. When she said she was only 13, Kane snapped back to reality. Among the innocent children, Kane gently told Safiria that with such an age gap, it would be difficult to develop any kind of relationship. Flustered and searching for the right words, Kane turned to Sylvia for help. Sylvia quickly recognized Safiria's true identity and bowed respectfully, calling her the pure Saintess. Realizing who Safiria really was, Kane immediately apologized, too embarrassed to meet her eyes, and knelt. With tearful eyes, Safiria told them they didn't need to bow. Sylvia whispered to Kane, revealing that Safiria was the daughter of the high priest at the Adia Regius church. She also mentioned that the Saintess's test could make their conversation uncomfortable. Just then, Anastasia barged into the room, facing Safiria and proclaiming that she had given her heart to Kane. Exasperated by both of their thoughtless actions, Maya angrily used magic to lift them into the air. Kane called out to Maya, asking about the true nature of her relationship with Safiria. Maya confirmed that she and Safiria were just friends and apologized for causing the disturbance. Still in high spirits with Kane, Maya told Sylvia that Safiria had informed her father about the church's situation, so she didn't need to worry anymore. Before causing any more chaos, Maya led the group out and said their goodbyes. As they left, Kane wondered if he had ever met Anastasia before. At the town's finest inn, Safiria announced she would use the pure Saintess oath on Kane. Before Anastasia could misunderstand, Maya quickly explained that the ceremony was similar to a blessing, where a nun grants divine power to the hero of her choice, enhancing their strength. However, the ritual could only be performed once. Suddenly, Maya pushed Safiria onto the bed, demanding she bestow the power on Anastasia instead of Kane, to improve their chances of defeating the enemy. Safiria replied that raw power alone couldn't defeat evil, but a pure heart could make the difference. That's why she had chosen Kane over her friend. Fuming, Maya was about to argue, but Anastasia interrupted and agreed with Safiria's decision. She emphasized that Kane was a promising swordsman, stronger than herself. With a serious look, the princess added that without Safiria's faith in him, they wouldn't have come this far. Maya, still skeptical of Kane's ability to protect an entire kingdom, pointed out that he could hardly protect himself. Anastasia reminded Maya of what Elena had said about Kane. Someone who always sets down his sword, a sign of a budding swordsmanship talent. Though Maya didn't fully understand Elena's words, she reluctantly decided to postpone the oath and declared that from now on, they couldn't meet Kane without her consent, which made Safiria pout in frustration. As the argument continued, it was clear Maya was growing tired. For a brief moment, she imagined Kane joining their group, even planning to make him a special aide. But Anastasia quickly snapped her back to reality, reminding her that tomorrow was a big event. The next morning, on Wild Wolf Mountain, Kane visited the temple and spoke with the goddess, sharing the gifts from the children and the improved weather after the evil dragon was defeated. As usual, he prayed for the goddess's protection. By chance, he found a suit of armor beside the temple, along with a letter addressed to the weak hero. Instead of taking it, Kane chose to wear the armor. Just seconds later, an arrow shot straight toward him. Snakehead's subordinates emerged, eager to take Kane down. While trying to make sense of the situation, Jinx attacked, injuring his leg. They relentlessly targeted his unprotected spots, making Kane realize their true goal was to kill him. Amidst the fight, Kane reminded them that their actions were illegal. Jinx scoffed, claiming that if he died, the forest monsters would be blamed. To buy time, Kane kicked some dust into Jinx's eyes and fled. Enraged, Jinx vowed to kill Kane and sell every orphan in the camp until none were left. Kane believed his familiarity with the forest would help him escape, but misfortune struck. He started feeling dizzy and collapsed. Jinx mocked him, boasting about why their clan was called the Two-Headed Vipers. It turned out the axe Jinx had struck him with earlier was coated in a special poison. As the venom spread, paralyzing his body, Sylvia and the orphans flashed through Kane's mind. A mysterious voice jolted him awake. Moments later, Jinx noticed the grass rustling and swung his axe hastily. But he struck only empty air. Instantly, a sword pierced his chest, wiping the smug grin off his face. Kane reminded Jinx that the church's potion had saved countless lives. At that moment, Kurtz appeared, sneering that Jinx was no better than a D-rank adventurer. Kurtz warned Kane that they were on different levels, then declared Kane would soon meet his end. In an instant, the battle between a C-rank and a D-rank adventurer began. Kurtz quickly gained the upper hand, mocking Kane for his feeble attacks. Arrogant, Kurtz unleashed a powerful strike, but Kane managed to block it just in time. Kurtz taunted that Jinx had recently been promoted to C rank, while Kane had stagnated for years. Grinding his teeth, Kane retorted that Kurtz didn't deserve to be called an adventurer. Even with his mithril sword stronger than Kurtz's weapon, Kane lacked the physical strength to overpower him. Suddenly, Kurtz kicked Kane, throwing him off balance. He confessed to killing both men and monsters alike, then launched another savage blow. Facing a seasoned killer, Kane realized he was in real danger. Furious, Kurtz condemned Kane for daring to call himself an adventurer, claiming all he ever did was pick herbs and cling to a naive belief in justice. Kane crashed into a tree, leaving Kurtz ready to deliver the final blow. But in that moment, Kane somehow blocked Kurtz's strike. Kurtz then revealed that he was the one who had targeted the church on his boss's orders, confidently declaring his impending victory. He threatened that Kane would never see Sylvia or the children again. In a counterattack, Kane kicked Kurtz in the stomach and hurled something at him. Kurtz slashed at it furiously, but was immediately surrounded by a strange garlic-scented smoke. Disoriented, he stumbled, crashing into a tree, causing pine cones to rain down on him. Seizing the moment, Kane charged forward, believing he had ended the fight. But Kurtz refused to surrender, raising his sword once more. As if the pine cones became Kane's unlikely allies, they struck Kurtz, causing him to drop his weapon. Gasping for breath, Kane knew that his mithril sword had saved his life. Without it, he would have long joined his fallen comrades. After the ordeal, Kane decided to postpone herb gathering until tomorrow, unsure of what the clan might try next. He hurried to the guild to report the incident, where Anastoria leapt with joy, relieved that he had survived the fierce battle unscathed. Sephiria then asked about the pine cones, and Maya explained they came from a tree the children often played under or used for decorations. Curious, Anastoria asked Maya if she had used magic to make them fall, but Maya denied it. This only deepened the princess's admiration for Kane, convinced he had planned it all. Overcome with curiosity, Anastoria punched the tree trunk, but nothing fell, leaving Maya puzzled. Glancing at Sephiria, Maya noticed tears streaming down her face. Sephiria believed divine intervention had protected Kane once again in his time of need. Maya simply chuckled, waving off the notion, and reminded everyone they still had unfinished business. At the guild, Elena reassured Kane that he wouldn't face any trouble since the Viper clan initiated the conflict. She assured him the guild would trust his detailed account, and the higher-ups would review everything thoroughly. Even so, Kane couldn't shake his unease. Elena expressed her relief at seeing him return safely to the guild. Kane's face flushed red as he looked down, thanking her for her concern. Meanwhile, guild staff conducted a thorough investigation into the incident. Kane worried that Snakehead might escape accountability through cunning arguments, perhaps framing the incident as an isolated case caused by unruly subordinates. At the Viper clan's headquarters, Snakehead ordered his men to lie low until the situation calmed. Two of them protested, fearing other organizations would see their silence as weakness. But before the argument escalated, uninvited guests arrived. The clan members tried to restrain the intruders, but Anastoria effortlessly brought them down with a single strike. Witnessing her power, Snakehead began to suspect she was a magically enhanced swordswoman. But it didn't take long for him to realize she was a genuinely formidable opponent. Wasting no time on small talk, Anastoria demanded to know why he continued targeting Kane. After some evasion, Snakehead finally confessed he couldn't overlook what Kane had done to his men. With a murderous glare, Snakehead lunged at Anastoria, wielding two swords and claiming she wouldn't evade his attack. Anastoria drew her blade and shattered his swords in one clean motion. At that moment, the trio proudly introduced themselves as the Rose and Maiden Bloom. Realizing his clan stood no chance against an S-rank team, Snakehead struggled to stay composed. He apologized for attacking Anastoria and quickly pivoted to a legal defense strategy. He accused her of trespassing on his headquarters, claiming his actions were lawful and aimed solely at recovering unpaid church taxes. Moreover, he demanded compensation for the damages caused by their unannounced visit, hoping to catch her off guard. Unfazed, Anastoria calmly produced a document granting her authority to conduct an independent investigation, tightening the noose around Snakehead's argument. Maya delivered the final blow, declaring she had full authority to arrest Snakehead at any time. Sweat dripped from his face as Maya announced her powers to detain, prosecute, and even execute punishment on the spot if necessary. As a senior officer, Maya officially placed the two-headed Viper clan under arrest for their crimes. Unwilling to accept Maya's judgment, Snakehead resisted, forcing her to order his immediate execution. He drew a hidden dagger and lunged at Cytherea, but Anastoria reacted swiftly, neutralizing the threat before disaster could strike. The next morning, at Kane's home, he felt utterly exhausted after a sleepless night. Even with 3 cats curled up beside him, their presence did little to bring him peace. A short while later, Sylvia burst into his room, throwing her arms around him and scolding him for facing the Viper clan alone. Kane, bewildered, had no idea what she was talking about. Sylvia inspected him for injuries, then pulled him into another embrace. She begged him to avoid dangerous situations, and Kane awkwardly apologized for worrying her. Sylvia reminisced about Kane's childhood, when he wouldn't even go to the bathroom alone and often claimed he'd marry her when he grew up. She found it hard to believe that the timid boy had grown strong enough to take down Snakehead and his gang single-handedly. Kane let out a surprised gasp, still unable to believe what he had accomplished, partly due to the meddling trio's intervention. The next morning, he visited an old friend, Bacchus, to share his frustrations. He recounted how his former innkeeper, a victim of the Viper clan, had decided to move to the capital to live with her daughter after the clan's downfall. The inn where he used to stay had shut down early in the day. To make matters worse, the rising number of monsters in the area had filled every other inn with waves of adventurers. Bacchus joked, asking if Kane had become a government agent after the Viper clan's downfall. Kane quickly denied it, explaining he wasn't behind the operation and that the guild had issued a statement clearing his name. Bacchus chuckled, suggesting Kane must be overwhelmed with invitations from other groups. But Kane insisted he would only be a hindrance to any team. His biggest concern now was finding a place to stay for the night. At that moment, Cytherea entered the tavern. Kane, surprised, wondered why she was there. Cytherea said she had something to discuss with him. As they shared a meal, courtesy of Kane, she returned the platinum coins he had used to protect the church. Kane felt a little embarrassed, recalling how he had trembled before Snakehead. Realizing that Cytherea had seen everything, and that her group was behind the Viper clan's defeat. Kane took her hand and said that, since he couldn't be sure the coins were originally his, he would donate them to the church. Cytherea was astonished at his willingness to give the money away, even though he had nowhere to stay. Suddenly, she placed his hand on her forehead. With deep admiration for his noble qualities, she declared Kane worthy of receiving the maiden's oath. Before she could complete the ritual, Maya and Anastoria entered the tavern. The princess quickly pulled Cytherea away from Kane, creating a tense moment as she scolded Cytherea for meeting him without permission. Kane noticed Anastoria's hesitant glance, her cheeks slightly flushed. She thanked him again, and Kane became certain she was one of the girls he had met at the orphanage. Bacchus teased Maya, joking that Kane had become so popular he'd stolen her friend. Right then, Kane turned to Anastoria and asked directly about the mark they had left at the Viper clan's headquarters. Unable to dodge the question, Anastoria admitted she had done it so people would stop underestimating him. Kane gently reminded her that being treated like royalty meant nothing to him, but if that was her way of showing gratitude, he appreciated her efforts. Anastoria stood just as flustered before Kane, while Cytherea practically collapsed from embarrassment. Maya, stepping in as the protective friend, warned Kane to stay away from them. Before leaving, Maya firmly instructed him to forget everything Cytherea had just said. Turning to Bacchus, Kane asked why he had stayed silent while Maya fumed. Bacchus admitted he had no idea what to do and, to make up for it, suggested Kane visit the guild for solutions. That evening, Kane went to the guild, where Elena asked if he had tried signing up for the adventurer lodging service. Kane nodded but said it hadn't worked out. Determined to help, Elena revealed a secret about an empty room in the guild staff dormitory. However, when Kane checked, the room was already occupied. To make amends, Elena offered Kane a temporary stay in her own room. As a man of principle, Kane refused, saying he would sleep at the church instead. Elena reminded him that grown men were forbidden from staying in a place managed by nuns. When Kane considered sleeping in the hallway, she insisted it would only make her worry more. Kane, surprised, wondered why Elena didn't find it inconvenient to share a room with him. Reluctantly, he agreed in the end. Kane tried to enjoy the tea Elena made, sweetened with plenty of milk, but she noticed his hands trembling. He explained that whenever his mind wandered, his hands tended to shake. Despite telling himself to stay resolute, this time he couldn't shake off the haunting feeling from the battle. Hearing this, Elena began to sweat nervously, letting her own thoughts drift. She placed her hand over his and reassured him, saying he didn't need to worry. After all, it was her first time trying to comfort someone this way, and fretting over her mismatched underwear. While she was lost in her embarrassment, Kane confessed that, despite being an adventurer often facing deadly foes, he still wasn't accustomed to taking a life. The memory of that moment still lingered. Kane worried Elena might think him a coward, but instead, she felt ashamed for misunderstanding him. After a brief silence, Elena told Kane he wasn't a coward. With her own hands trembling slightly, she said it only proved he was a kind-hearted person. Moments later, Elena gently pulled him toward the bed, nudging him to lie down. She repeated how happy she was that he was safe and expressed her hope that he would always return to the guild unharmed. Elena added firmly that if he ever stopped showing up, she would never forgive him. Pulling him close, she told him to relax and have a good night's sleep. In contrast to their peaceful evening, Maya was nursing a headache, feeling as though her eardrums might burst as Anastoria and Safiria endlessly gushed about Kane. Finally losing her patience, Maya snapped and ordered both of them to be quiet. The two girls, still entranced by their thoughts of Kane, held hands and pleaded with Maya to calm down. Shifting back to a serious tone, Maya reminded Anastoria of the real reason they had come to Urntown. Anastoria replied with determination, saying their ultimate goal was to stop the resurrection of the Dark God sealed atop Mount Rest. Alongside this, they needed to act swiftly to address the inevitable surge of monsters in the area. To fulfill their mission, Maya emphasized that Anastoria, the strongest living hero of this era, deserved the Maiden's Oath. However, Safiria argued that what would defeat the Dark God wasn't heroism but kindness. In her view, granting Kane power didn't entirely sit well with her. Anastoria understood Safiria's point but felt uneasy about the ritual, which required a man and a woman to embrace. The princess urged Safiria to reconsider, solely because of that. As the debate grew heated, Maya asked Safiria why it had to be Kane, and what she truly meant by kindness. Maya admitted she didn't want to see Safiria make sacrifices, but if helping Kane was the key to victory, she wouldn't stand in the way. Safiria simply replied it was divine intuition, to which Maya firmly refused to accept as a valid reason. The conversation shifted to Anastoria's own motives. She remained determined to recruit Kane into her team, planning to make him stronger to convince Maya that he was worthy of joining. Safiria agreed and volunteered to help train Kane. With no interest left in arguing, Maya reluctantly allowed them to use the upcoming monster outbreak to push Kane toward S rank. Meanwhile, Elena's peaceful night was disrupted by Kane's thunderous snoring, making it impossible for her to sleep. At Wild Wolf Mountain, Kane expressed his gratitude to the mountain goddess for her protection. It seemed the reward for the herb-gathering mission had returned to the original 3 silver coins, and Kane couldn't be happier knowing the church had overcome its financial struggles. However, what troubled him was the growing number of monsters appearing in the area. Suddenly, he heard a cry for help and rushed toward it, spotting 3 goblins near the edge of a cliff. As he wondered whether he could handle the small group of monsters, the cry for help echoed again. The goblins noticed Kane and charged at him, but he easily dispatched them with his mithril sword. He then hurried to the cliff's edge and found York, a woodcutter from the mountain village, trapped. When the old man asked about the goblins, Kane assured him they had been dealt with. Seeing York's injuries, Kane realized he had been hurt in the monster encounter. York, slightly embarrassed, asked if Kane could help him back to the village. Kane didn't mind but suggested treating the wound first. He pulled out a recovery potion worth 10 silver coins, but York hesitated, saying it was far too expensive. This reminded Kane of Sylvia's insistence on helping him before. Applying the potion to the wound, York winced at the stinging pain, but the injury began to heal almost immediately. Kane then carried the old man down the mountain. Along the way, York commented that Kane was truly different from the other adventurers he had met. York recounted his recent encounters with monsters in the forest, revealing that the goblins had established a lair somewhere on the mountain. He had once sneaked a glance inside and discovered a goblin lord, a B-rank monster and leader of the lower goblins. Despite the lurking danger, York chose to stay in the forest, as he had a family to provide for. He shared that their village chief had visited the Adventurer Guild to request a monster extermination. Adventurers had already been stationed in the village, but York worried if their forces were enough to face such a formidable foe. The financial burden on the village also grew heavier due to the cost of the request. Kane wondered if he could join the monster extermination team. Once back in the village, he tended to the wounded and brewed herbal tea for them. Looking over the herbs he had brought, Kane felt relieved that his supplies were still sufficient. Kane's attention was drawn by Kesha, York's granddaughter, who said she was hungry. York could only apologize for returning home empty-handed and injured. As expected, Kane quickly came up with a solution. He pulled out some leftover bread and asked Kesha to help distribute it to the other children. The little girl ran off happily, a bright smile lighting her face. Watching her, York asked Kane about his dream of building a house. He assured Kane that he and the village carpenters would gladly help. Overhearing the conversation, other villagers also volunteered to pitch in, offering their support to help Kane build his dream home. That afternoon, Kane strolled through the village and came across a crowd gathered around adventurers preparing for the monster extermination mission. Curious, he pushed through the throng and expressed his desire to join, despite not being registered through the guild. To his surprise, he was warmly welcomed, with some even calling him a one-man army. While Kane tried to correct the misunderstanding, a young man shot him a disdainful look. In contrast, Randall, leader of the C-rank adventurer group Bear Killers, enthusiastically greeted him. Randall thanked Kane for stepping up and, after a brief friendly exchange, the group began planning to locate the goblin lair. Knowing Kane's familiarity with the mountain, Randall asked for his input. Just as Kane was about to speak, the young adventurer from earlier mocked him, calling him a grain picker. The man was Abel, the leader of the A-rank group Comet Chasers. Abel declared that Kane, as a mere D-rank, would only slow the team down. Casaro, one of Abel's members, advised Kane to ignore his leader, explaining that Abel was only upset because Kane was getting all the attention. Another member, Cruz, revealed that Abel had long tracked the two-headed Viper clan with the intent to destroy them, but Kane had repeatedly intervened and foiled his plans. Although Kane denied the accusation, Abel dismissed it as false modesty. Seething with anger, Abel smashed a barrel of ale and declared he would defeat the Goblin Lord himself. Abel stormed off in anger, prompting Kasara to throw in a teasing remark. Kane, overwhelmed by their youthful energy and erratic temperaments, refocused on the mission with Randall. Meanwhile, at the heart of Wild Wolf Mountain, Anastoria couldn't stop thinking about Kane as she dispatched monster after monster. Facing various creatures, she grew confident they were nearing the Dark God's seal. The team was determined to accelerate Kane's growth as quickly as possible, except for Maya, who thought their ambitions were unrealistic. After some time, Maya's search spell detected a cave teeming with monsters. Anastoria suggested they wipe out the weak minions but leave the leader injured, reserving it for Kane to finish. To blow off steam, Maya volunteered to deal with the weaker creatures, but no one expected her to go all out. She unleashed a devastating spell, shaking the ground as Kane stood only a few steps away, startled to reunite with the group of girls. A fiery tornado, aptly named Flare Destroyer, engulfed the cave, precisely the spot Kane had suspected to be the goblin's lair. As Maya's flames turned the area into a blazing inferno, Anastoria warned that her overwhelming power would soon attract attention. Fortunately, Maya managed to pull back before triggering a forest fire. Still, she looked satisfied, proclaiming that the explosion's roar had cleared all her stress. The stunned expressions on Anastoria and Saphiria's faces said it all. With the cave's ceiling reduced to ashes, they wondered if any monsters could have survived. Their answer came when Maya pointed to a severely injured Goblin King. Seeing a Goblin King instead of a Goblin Lord, Anastoria concluded there might be even more monsters around. Likely drawn by Maya's excessive use of power. The princess worried the Goblin King might die before Kane arrived and felt a twinge of guilt. Maya suggested Saphiria heal the creature to keep it alive for Kane. Although unsure whether healing magic would work on a monster, Saphiria agreed, wanting to support Kane's growth. To everyone's surprise, the healing spell had the opposite effect on the Goblin King, shocking Saphiria. She realized her magic had accidentally pushed the Goblin King into a state akin to divine punishment, violating the laws of the gods. Hearing footsteps approaching, the group quickly hid. When Kane arrived at the scene, he hesitated, unsure if this was the goblin's lair. Surveying the area, he noticed the corpses of the goblins scattered around. For a moment, he wondered if the explosion had been caused by the goblins themselves, but quickly dismissed the idea, realizing no goblin shaman could create such destruction. Exploring the cave further, Kane stumbled upon the bodies of 2 dead goblin lords. Suddenly, the still-living Goblin King lunged at him. At that moment, Abel appeared, chastising Kane for leaving the group behind. However, Abel's expression quickly shifted to shock as he witnessed Kane slicing the Goblin King clean in half. Moments later, Randall arrived, scolding Kane for moving ahead of the team. As more adventurers began to gather, murmurs spread through the crowd. They were awestruck, believing Kane had single-handedly defeated the Goblin Lords and the much stronger Goblin King. When they learned there were also the bodies of orcs and ogres nearby, the adventurers were even more astonished. Kane tried to clarify that things weren't as they seemed, but no one would listen. Meanwhile, Abel stood silently, then suddenly gritted his teeth and walked briskly toward Kane. To everyone's surprise, he apologized for his earlier disrespectful attitude. Bowing his head, Abel admitted Kane's strength, acknowledging that defeating a Goblin King was a challenge even for an A-rank adventurer like himself. Kane, smiling, graciously accepted the apology. Just as Kane thought they might finally get along, Abel suddenly declared Kane his rival. Kane admitted to landing the finishing blow on the Goblin King but firmly denied being responsible for the massive explosion. Cruz chimed in, confidently claiming that Kane was a mage capable of casting spells without incantations. He recounted the legendary tale of Sage Dana, who had eradicated 300 monsters led by an ogre lord during an attack on the royal capital. Dana had used Flare Destroyer without uttering a single chant. When Cruz compared Kane's magical power to Dana's, both Abel and Casara were left speechless. Backed into a corner, Kane insisted he knew almost nothing about magic, but this only shocked Cruz further, who believed Kane must be a natural genius capable of using advanced spells without formal training. Abel praised Kane for his humility, and Casaro agreed, noting how Kane was the complete opposite of Abel. To defend Kane, Randall stepped in, firmly asking everyone to believe his words. Randall went further, declaring that all mission funds and rewards should go to Kane. After Randall's words, a heavy silence fell over the crowd. They began to realize the significance of Kane's role in the mission. The quiet was so profound that every breath could be heard. Then, someone broke the silence, agreeing with Randall. One by one, the adventurers voiced their support, making the decision to award the rewards to Kane official. Taking the opportunity, Randall jokingly demanded Kane treat everyone to a good meal. The next day, Anastoria heard from the villagers that Kane had donated the mission reward to help the village. An elderly man mentioned the donation was made anonymously, but he was certain it had come from Kane. Thanks to Kane's generosity, the funds the village had spent on the monster extermination were reimbursed, leaving the villagers deeply grateful. Meanwhile, Safiria played with the children, listening as they excitedly shared stories about the sweets Kane had given them. To show his gratitude, York planned to repair the small shrine on the mountain. Meanwhile, after gathering more information about Kane, the humorous trio prepared to embark on their next mission. Anastoria, intent on helping Kane gain more public recognition, devised a plan for him to face common monsters. Maya, the most practical member of the group, remarked that Kane's determination to give back to the community was the real reason he was becoming more respected. Ignoring Maya's comment, Anastoria drafted a new extermination request, designed both to showcase Kane's abilities and to assist the villagers. The princess proposed they target monsters they had already planned to eliminate. Maya and Sephiria both agreed that monster extermination wasn't exactly Kane's specialty, unless it involved herb gathering. Anastoria dismissed their concerns, assuring them that Elena, mockingly referred to as the pink-haired hag, would handle convincing Kane to help them. A few days later, Elena advised Kane to avoid certain missions. In a brief flashback, it was revealed that Anastoria had ordered Elena to assign these missions to Kane, threatening her with appropriate consequences if she interfered. Though Elena initially refused the princess's demands, she ultimately gave in to Anastoria's pressure. Back in the present, Kane was puzzled when Elena urged him to decline 3 specific requests. Looking anxious, Elena explained that even she wouldn't accept those missions if she had the option to refuse. Upon reviewing the requests, Kane realized they involved hunting a goblin lord, an orc lord, and an ogre lord, missions far beyond the scope of a D-rank adventurer. Just then, Abel walked in, commenting that such requests rarely appeared at the D-rank counter. Moreover, all the requests were specifically marked for Kane, which piqued Abel's curiosity. Known for his bold and unpredictable personality, Abel seemed unexpectedly intrigued by Kane. Elena found this sudden camaraderie a refreshing change. Abel asked if his Comet Chasers team could join the mission with Kane, declaring it an opportunity to compete with his newfound rival. He vowed to steal the spotlight from Kane. Kane quickly explained that he wasn't interested in monster hunting missions and still had an unfinished herb gathering task. To help Kane finish faster, Abel, along with Casaro and Cruz, volunteered to assist and pulled him out of the guild. Eavesdropping nearby, the humorous trio, especially Anastoria, were caught off guard by Kane's new allies. Maya, standing by the reception desk, apologized to Elena for failing to rein in her foolish friends. Elena urged Maya to keep them under tighter control next time, but Anastoria interrupted before they could lose track of Kane. She ordered everyone to move out but suddenly paused, as if remembering something. When Cytherea asked where she was going, the princess replied it was just a small errand. Rushing out, Anastoria reminded everyone to stay close to Kane. On Wild Wolf Mountain, Kane was astonished to find a massive shrine. Casaro, equally surprised, admitted he didn't know such a structure existed, while Kane explained he had seen it before, though it was much smaller back then. As they entered, Kane guessed the villagers might have expanded the shrine to express their gratitude. He offered a prayer to the mountain goddess for protection, and Casaro followed suit. Afterward, the group resumed their journey. Though they were supposedly following Kane, Abel took charge of the mission. He proposed they rendezvous at a wooden cabin deep in the forest, declaring the winner would be determined by who killed the most low-level monsters. Abel urged everyone to take the steep path and slay any monsters they encountered. His team eagerly forged ahead, leaving Kane behind before he could say a word. With a look of disbelief, Maya watched as Anastoria had defeated a horde of low-level monsters and stacked their bodies in an area rich with herbs. The princess confidently remarked that Kane was bound to pass through there. Maya expressed her frustration at Anastoria's unorthodox training methods, but the princess insisted that one way or another, this approach would benefit Kane. Cytherea noted that reducing the number of monsters was still a clever move. Maya, not outright disagreeing, gave Anastoria the impression that her attitude toward Kane was beginning to shift. By chance, they heard Kane's footsteps approaching and quickly hid, while Cytherea quietly slipped away in another direction. When Kane arrived at the scene, he looked utterly confused. Suddenly, an ogre lord appeared to stir back to life, but collapsed again, unable to withstand its fatal injuries. An orc lord writhed in pain, and Kane swiftly ended its suffering. From a distance, Anastoria watched with pride, much like a mother admiring her child. Meanwhile, Maya, though still skeptical of Kane's abilities, began to see how the princess's bizarre methods were building his courage and resilience. Maya started to acknowledge Kane's potential, though she wasn't ready to fully accept him yet. Glancing at Anastoria, Maya wondered what was going on in the princess's mind, thinking to herself that Kane and Anastoria might share the same brain cell. As for the princess's favorite subject, Kane was the first to arrive at the wooden cabin. After encountering countless monsters, he had managed to gather only a small amount of herbs. Still on edge, he flinched when he heard the rustling of tall grass, only to find Abel emerging, having taken down just 3 of each type of low-level monster. Not long after, the girls appeared, reporting they had also only encountered weak monsters. Fueling the competitive spirit, Abel urged everyone to head back into the forest to hunt more dangerous creatures. Unbeknownst to Abel, Anastoria had secretly cleared out all the low-level monsters along his path. When Abel asked Kane about the results of their contest, an ogre king suddenly emerged, prompting Casaro to retreat in fear. Kane quickly instructed Abel to protect his teammate while he drew the monster's attention. Without hesitation, he hurled his sword at the ogre king, which shockingly collapsed on the spot. Kane stood stunned, wondering if the wind had somehow guided his blade. Abel checked on Casaro, who reassured him she was fine, reminding him that she was an A-rank adventurer. Casaro also thanked Kane for saving them. Abel, curious, asked how Kane could control his sword as if commanding it. Remarking that with such a technique, the ogre king stood no chance. Kane mumbled something about it possibly being thanks to one of the monsters he'd faced earlier, leaving Abel confused and exclaiming, "What kind of person are you?" Abel couldn't believe that Kane had just taken down an ogre king and emerged completely unscathed, even though the creature wasn't part of the competition. Feeling utterly defeated, Abel reluctantly admitted defeat. The group's eyes widened in shock as they noticed the scattered remains of low-level monsters along Kane's path. Without much discussion, Abel raised the white flag. Nevertheless, the comet chasers resolved to grow stronger. For a moment, Kane considered explaining the truth, but knowing they wouldn't believe him, he kept quiet. As the group helped Kane gather more herbs, Maya sternly scolded Anastoria for placing an ogre king in her training area. The appearance of such a high-level monster made Maya suspect something was off, and she ordered the group to return to the inn for an emergency meeting. However, they soon realized Cytherea was missing, prompting everyone to split up and search for her. Kane told the younger members to go ahead while he checked the shrine. There, he found someone inside. It was Cytherea. She declared that destiny had called, and promptly took Kane back to Urntown, where they rejoined the comet chasers just in time. At the church, Sephiria opened a door and called for Sylvia. Without hesitation, she requested the most private room, instructing Sylvia to ensure no one entered while they performed the oath ceremony. Abel and the others had followed Cain to the church. But Sylvia blocked their way, refusing to let them through. Inside the room, Cain recalled how he and Altina used to get scolded for playing there as children. Sephiria expressed her gratitude to Cain for giving the resurrection fruit to Anastoria. Cain humbly credited the princess, who had gathered the necessary ingredients herself to create the revival potion. Sephiria admired Cain's natural kindness, always thinking of others despite his own struggles. From aiding the church to supporting the village, his compassion had left a profound impact on the lives of everyone he encountered. Sephiria began removing her top, prompting Cain to turn away in embarrassment. She explained that she could only bestow divine power on one person in her lifetime, and this time, she wanted Cain to accept her oath. Then, Sephiria asked him to remove his shirt, leaving Cain stunned. Reluctant to comply without an explanation, Cain demanded to know why. Sephiria revealed that for the ritual to succeed, their heartbeats needed to sync as much as possible. She reassured him that he could put his clothes back on immediately after the ritual was completed. They sat on the floor, with Sephiria pressing her body against his back, her hands placed firmly on his chest. She instructed Cain to focus and regulate his heartbeat. Despite his efforts, Cain's heart continued to pound uncontrollably. Sephiria urged him to align his breathing with hers. As the ritual progressed, Sephiria began to delve into his mind. Midway through, Cain suddenly recalled the mysterious voice he had heard in the forest, and he finally realized who it belonged to. In a memory from 20 years ago, Cain remembered asking his old companion, Altena, why she had protected him from monsters. Despite suffering severe wounds, Altena had smiled weakly, reassuring him that everything was fine. But in that moment, Cain understood she wouldn't survive. She had lost too much blood. Using the last of her strength, Altena told Cain not to blame himself. With her final breath, she whispered that she would always be with him. Cain remembered growing up with Altina in the orphanage, where he had always seen her as an older sister. She was the reason he became an adventurer. After Altina's death, Cain had desperately sought ways to bring her back to life. But all his efforts failed. He never had the chance to confess his feelings to her. Sometime later, Cain discovered a letter Altena had left behind. In it, she urged him to become an adventurer who would save others no matter the cost. For weeks, Cain had wandered aimlessly, but Altina's letter reignited his purpose. Though he was often mocked as the herb picker and the eternal D-rank adventurer, Cain never let the ridicule stop him from helping others in his own way. Unbeknownst to him, Altena had always been watching over him, praying to the supreme god Audia for a chance to be with Cain again. The universe seemed to answer her prayers when one day, Cain stumbled upon a small statue of a deity. From that moment on, Altina's strength grew with Cain's sincere prayers, until she became the goddess of compassion. Back in the present, Altina appeared before Cain. And he felt the warmth of her presence. Cain burst into tears. And the two couldn't hold back their emotions after 2 decades apart. Altina teased him for being a grown man who still cried like a child. Seizing the moment, Cain begged her forgiveness for failing to protect her. Altina placed her hand on his cheek, gently reminding him of his promise never to blame himself for her fate. From the evil dragon to Snakehead's subordinates and the Ogre King, Cain asked how many times she had saved him. Instead of answering, Altina thanked him for his relentless prayers, which had given her the strength to protect him one last time. They embraced one final time before Altina said her goodbye. As she began to fade, she reminded him that the lively children were on their way. The moment she disappeared, Cain jolted back to reality, realizing Sephiria was still holding on to him, smiling and savoring the moment. Just then, Maya and Anastoria entered the room, stunned by the scene. Sylvia apologized for failing to keep them out, but seemed unfazed, noting that the ritual was complete. Anastoria stood frozen, while Maya confronted Sephiria for breaking her promise. Sephiria calmly pointed out that she had never agreed to anything and reassured them that Cain now had the strength to stop the dark god. As tension lingered in the room, Sylvia was suddenly called by someone outside. It was a messenger from Fort City, summoning her to an urgent council meeting. Chaos erupted when they learned that about 5,000 monsters were preparing to invade the town. In a state of high alert, the guards of Fort City readied themselves for the impending battle against the massive horde. The city's captain rallied his soldiers, urging them not to be overwhelmed by the enemy's numbers. He wondered if this dire situation was connected to the Dark God's resurrection. Knowing that the maiden was risking her life to seal the Dark God, the captain feared their forces wouldn't be enough to face such a catastrophic threat. As he felt his body trembling, His lieutenant asked if he was afraid. Regaining his composure, the captain reminded his soldiers that those who survived the battle would be promoted. As the monsters approached the fortress, they decided not to wait for reinforcements and launched an immediate counterattack. Meanwhile, at the council meeting, Walter, the council's spokesperson, announced a full-scale evacuation. He noted that although Fort City's forces were doing their best to hold off the monsters, reinforcements from the capital would not arrive in time. With a shortage of wagons and many sick, injured, and children needing evacuation, the meeting descended into chaos. Through it all, Anastasia remained silent, observing the scene. Maya raised her hand, standing alongside Georg, the Adventurer Guild's chairman. She proposed evacuating the townspeople northward toward the border, reasoning that a redirection would make it easier to guide those without transportation. To ensure safety, she suggested assigning town guards or D-rank adventurers as escorts. Maya then revealed the gravest challenge they faced, the resurrection of the Dark God on Mount City. As most of the room reeled in shock at the revelation, Maya reassured them that the Rosen Maidens would gladly assist. She detailed a plan, assigning reinforcements from the capital and high-ranking adventurers to handle the monster horde, while her team would confront the Dark God themselves. Chairman Georg was entrusted with command of the units. While Walter struggled to regain his composure, Anastasia finally spoke up, issuing directives. First, she reminded Walter that he was free to voice his opinions. Then, she stunned the room by announcing that D-rank adventurer Kane would join their mission. The room erupted in protests at her declaration.